we build things and make things that are soulless. Underneath that is we don't put care into the things. And underneath that is we don't actually believe in the soul as a fundamental idea. So why would we make things and with soul? Like the logic of that doesn't work. So I think it actually begins like many layers down, okay? And there's a few things that are going on. We've talked about the internet. Let's talk about capitalism. I'm not like an anti-capitalist, so don't hear me as some sort of Marxist here. But like, I'm also not a sycophant for capitalism, right? Like there's obviously trade-offs in any economic system. And one thing that happens is capitalism incentivizes scale, okay? So take a building, okay? They're building, I'm going to make something up. They're building a new office building in downtown Austin, okay? And it's a related properties. I'm making all this up. It's a related properties building. Related properties is based in New York. Okay, so you have the CEO of related properties. They approved the building. They hired some project manager to basically oversee the Texas real estate division, right? Then underneath that, they have a building manager. Then underneath that, they have some contractor. Then that contractor's hired all of these different companies that have their own CEO type person. Then they hire all of these people under that. And then those are the people building the building. We are now so far away from the related company's CEO. And so what happens is, to no fault of their own, they can't help but think of that building as and the people living in it as numbers on a spreadsheet. They can't help. How could you not think like that? I'm not. It's just how it needs to function. Now, if I were to build a house and to have some roommates in it after I've built the house and I live there, like Hammurabi's code was like you had to sleep under the bridge. Or no, maybe it wasn't Hammurabi's code. It was like some old code. You had to sleep underneath the bridge after you built it because you had to pay the cost if the dang thing didn't work. What does that do? That really changes the incentive structure, both sleeping under the bridge and just living where you live. And because of that, you have, due to our economic system, you have a disincentive for care and an incentive to just see people as numbers on a spreadsheet. And there's no soul in that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like Elon is the counterexample to that. Like he's the guy who sleeps on the manufacturing floor.
Yeah.
But he's also the one who's built the products that are like my car drives itself, which is fucking crazy. And it feels normal, which is also fucking crazy. You know what I mean? Like it's insane. And then I think about, if I look at a different example, when I was in Brussels, there's this cathedral that was built over 600 years, and it was like 10 different kings oversaw this, and like they, gave their children, they had to make this thing get finished, and it was like over generations and generations and generations to hold this torch just to build a building that wasn't even that big. But to think about that, the idea of like passing things on, it takes multiple generations to make something beautiful, to put that care in, and to keep that vision like stewarded through that. That's a different fucking thing.
The Japanese are very good at this.
Very good at it.
That is the exception, though, that proves the rule. What is different about Elon? He cares so much.
Yeah.
What's different about Steve Jobs? He cares so much, right? Like, in a founder-driven company, this is when something can change. But what did you say about Elon? He sleeps on the floor. Yeah. Like, that's what it takes. Steve Jobs died, what was he, 55 or something? Like, he didn't die because he lived a sweet and peaceful life. I bet part of the reason is he dealt with an extreme amount of stress and like bore the burden of birthing this magnificent company into the world. Now, the other thing I want to mention is, this is sort of my long view of history, but something changed with World War I. Okay, so if you look at art in the early 20th century, it's late stage Impressionism, early stage Cubism, and there's a romanticism about it, right? Like, the time before World War I was such a peaceful time in Europe, and there were things that were built that were just beautiful. And the word that always comes to mind is sweet. I think of the birds chirping in like Monet's garden at Giverny, and then World War I happens, and you look at art in the 1920s, and it's just completely different, right? You have Salvador Dali, you have
Duchamp,
right? It's so different. Now, you could say, well, there was still that spirit of optimism and stuff. And yes, that's true. But Art Deco was an American movement. And my theory into why is New York was across the pond from Europe where this war had happened. And there were these people who wanted that kind of optimism, that spirit. They still had that sense of excitement about the future. And they then said, we got to be in New York or something like that, right? And that works, but that begins to die with the Great Depression. And then after World War II, you just don't see it at all. You do not see it at all. At World War II is a huge break. And then you get modernism, right? You get Pierre Mondrian, you get much more right angles, you get Jackson Pollock, all those sorts of people. And in my opinion, like I go to the MoMA in New York and I'm much less inspired there than what I see at the Met. And what I like in art, what I like in things is I like to feel a sense of care in the work that has been created. And I feel like we left the heart and went up to the intellect. Like academia came up. And now when I'm in the MoMA, when I look at modern art, when it comes to like, I feel like I feel older art, at least that impressionist stuff. I feel it deeply and I understand it at a pre-verbal level, whereas a lot of the modern stuff, it's like, I need someone to explain it to me, right? This is why, who's the guy who has the, his name starts with an R. He sort of did those flat, abstract.
Rembrandt?
No, not Rembrandt.
Obviously he's not there, yeah.
There was another guy. Anyway, when I see a lot of abstract paintings, it's like, oh, David, if only you understood. Do you know what I mean?
If you only understood it was a tax write-off.
Yeah.
Like, that's what happened. They got appraised for $20 million, and they donated to the museum to avoid paying $20 million in taxes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm not nearly as big a fan of that stuff. And all this is to say that we talk about care, and we can talk about the internet, we can talk about capitalism, but when I laid that out, it begins with the death of the spirit. And I think that World War I and World War II were so devastating for people that I think it's been hard for us to regain a sense of enchantedness and a sense of, wow, it's really worth making something so beautiful.
Yeah, I wrote my senior thesis on Dalí, Buñuel, and Lorca, 3 Spanish artists who all were really influenced by the Spanish Civil War.
Rothko is his name.
Had the foundation of the culture of the spirit, like turning in its own population who are trying to fight against this like fascist government, and it just split the soul. And I think that's where surrealism was birthed out of. And if you look at Japanese anime, surrealism is like, they're like the purveyor of surrealism now. It all comes out of like the splitting of the atom, of the nuclear bomb. It's when you had this like testosterone driven culture that then got totally fucking castrated by the US. And it's this like cultural split that can happen when kind of like the soul dies, if you will. And then they're stuck in this like dreamland because they're kind of like this lost kid who can't move or develop or grow. And I think that's where, like, Lorca died doing it because he was gay. They basically killed him. Buñuel moved to France and then Mexico and became like an amazing director, and then Dalí's Dalí. But it was, I really think a lot of the surrealist is a reaction to this kind of like death of the soul, and that's when you go deep into the mind, into the subconscious.